Last week, I explained a little bit the rationale behind this Revelation series and why we're doing it right now. It seemed like an opportune time to dig into this book during an election season in particular, because Revelation happens to be a very political book, even though it might not seem that way on the surface. So the book of Revelation, it encouraged Christians in the first century to remain faithful to Jesus, while at the same time they were living in an empire that demanded their total allegiance, and even demanded that they worship the emperors of the empire. And then we looked at the first chapter of Revelation to see what some of the themes would be running throughout the book. Today, we are jumping significantly ahead. We're going to look at chapter 13, the first 8 or 11 verses of chapter 13. And we're skipping there because that is where we are introduced to the beasts. And the beasts are the reason for the book of Revelation. They are the immediate threat to John and the Christian community. So it makes sense to jump there to give us some context for when we go back to the earlier chapters. So I'm going to read Revelation chapter 13. Actually, I think I'll go verses 1 through 11. And then the dragon took his stand on the sand of the seashore. And I saw a beast rising out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads. And on its horns were 10 diadems, and on its heads were blasphemous names. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And the dragon gave it his power and his throne and great authority. One of its heads seemed to have received a death blow, but its mortal wound had been healed. And in amazement, the whole earth followed the beast. They worshipped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who can fight against it?" The beast was given a mouth, uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming God's name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. Also, it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. It was given authority over every tribe and people and language and nation. And all the inhabitants of the earth will worship it, everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb that was slaughtered. Let anyone who has an ear listen. If you are to be taken captive, into captivity you go. And if you kill with the sword you must be killed. Here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. So that is the description of the first beast. And I mentioned last week that the symbols and the imagery in Revelation probably seem strange to us. I hope it seems strange to you, actually. Some of the details, to me, just seem weird and arbitrary, or picked at random. But the Jews and Christians of the first century would have recognized these symbols. And that's because they allude to other parts of Scripture, and especially in the book of Daniel. And that makes sense, actually, if you think about John's situation. So John has been exiled, or he's fled to this island because of his testimony about Jesus. So he is in some kind of danger because of his faith in Jesus. The book of Daniel is also about an exile named Daniel. He's an Israelite. And he is also under threat because of his faith in God. So in the book of Daniel, an Israelite named Daniel is exiled to Babylon. And when he is there, he is pressured to assimilate to the Babylonian culture and to leave behind his Jewish faith. And he's asked to disregard the Mosaic law. But it turns out Daniel resists these efforts. If you were in church, maybe a month ago or so, we read a part of Daniel together where Daniel is put into the lion's den, but he is saved by God. He remains faithful, and the message of the first part of Daniel is that if you remain faithful, God will take you. So that's the first half of Daniel. In the second half, Daniel receives a series of visions or revelations. And this is the apocalyptic part of the book. Apocalypse literally means unveiling. And in apocalyptic literature, an angel or some other kind of heavenly creature will visit a human being to give them supernatural or secret information. And this often happens through visions. And this happens in Daniel. And so I want to read part of Daniel chapter 7 to give you a sense of what it sounds like. And as I'm reading it, I want you to take note of any similarities that you hear between Daniel 7 and the part of Revelation that I just read about the beast, the first beast. So this is Daniel chapter 7, verses 1 through 8. In the first year of King Belshazzar of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head as he lay in bed. And then he wrote down the dream. I, Daniel, saw in my vision by night the four winds of heaven stirring up the great sea, and four great beasts came up out of the sea, different from one another. The first beast was like a lion and had eagle's wings. Then, as I watched, its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a human being. And a human mind was given to it. Another beast appeared, a second one, that looked like a bear. It was raised up on one side, and it had 3 tusks in its mouth among its teeth, and was told, Arise, devour many bodies. After this, as I watched, another beast appeared, like a leopard. The beast had 4 wings of a bird on its back, and 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this, I saw in the visions by night a 4th beast, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth, and it was devouring, breaking in pieces, and stamping what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that preceded it, and it had 10 horns. I was considering the horns when another horn appeared, a little one coming up among them. And to make room for it, 3 of the earlier horns were plucked up by the roots. There were eyes like human eyes in this horn, and a mouth speaking arrogantly. So in Daniel's vision, instead of 1 beast, there are 4 beasts, and each one resembles a part of the beast in Revelation. So in Daniel, there's a beast like a lion, there's one like a bear, one like a leopard, and then a final beast with 10 horns. And later in the chapter, in Daniel 7, it is revealed that these beasts, in his vision, each represent a different kingdom that is coming, or a different empire that is going to rule over Israel. And each one would rule for a time. And this is a feature of apocalyptic writing. Beasts and birds typically represent kingdoms or empires. And then heads on those beasts, or wings on the beasts, or horns, those represent different rulers within those empires. I know it feels like we might be getting into the weeds here, but just stick with me for a little bit more about Daniel. Remember that the story in Daniel takes place during the Babylonian exile. So you might assume that Daniel was written during the Babylonian exile. It does not seem like this is the case, though. Daniel actually did not appear until hundreds of years after the Babylonian exile. And instead, it emerged during the Greek period, when a particularly harsh ruler was terrorizing the Israelites. You may have heard of him. I don't know. Raise your hand if you have heard of Antiochus the Fourth. Yeah. It is likely that the horn on the fourth beast from Daniel 7 represents Antiochus the Fourth. The fourth beast is the strongest, it's the most destructive, and one of its horns or kings speaks arrogantly and blasphemously. And later, Daniel says that this horn or this king makes war with the holy ones. He shall speak words against the Most High, and he shall attempt to change the sacred seasons and the law. This is exactly what Antiochus IV did in Israel during his reign. So he added the word Epiphanes to his name, which means God manifest, quite blasphemous. And if you've read the book of Maccabees, which is in the Apocrypha, you will see how destructive and evil Antiochus was. He plundered the temple in Jerusalem. He set fire to the city. Essentially, he tried to wipe out Jewish religion in its entirety. So he outlawed Jewish customs like circumcision. If a family did circumcise their infant son, the entire family would be executed. He forbid the Israelites to observe their holy days, and he would not let them offer sacrifices to Yahweh in the temple. He ordered the people to abandon the law, and he actually forced people, Jews, to sacrifice pigs to pagan gods in the Jerusalem temple. So his reign was truly a nightmare for the Israelites. And if you read the book of Maccabees, you will see how the Maccabees actually defeated the Greeks and pushed them out of their land. All that to say, it is during this crisis that the book of Daniel first appeared, as the people were being oppressed by pagan powers who were literally trying to destroy their faith. And this history tells us something fundamental about apocalyptic writing in general. It is created in times of crisis and in times of persecution. And its purpose is to offer hope and offer encouragement to people who are suffering and being pressured to abandon their faith. So clearly, the book of Daniel influenced the visions in Revelation. So we might ask, what could this tell us about the first beast in Revelation chapter 13? Well, it is significant, I think, that this beast is a conglomeration of the beasts in Daniel's vision. This suggests that it is a larger and deadlier beast than previous ones in Israel's history. So John also says that this beast has 10 horns and 7 heads, which probably corresponded to particular Roman emperors or rulers within the empire. John also says that the beast derives power from the dragon, and we're going to look at the dragon in coming weeks. But all we need to know at this point is that the dragon represents Satan. So the beast is propped up and given authority by Satan. This is interesting, an interesting detail. John writes that one of the heads seems to have received a death blow. But somehow, this wound had been healed, and in amazement, the whole earth worships the beast. And by worshiping the beast, they unknowingly worship him. So, a note about the head with the wound. There was one Roman emperor who was particularly cruel to Christians, and that was the Emperor Nero. And we will talk about him more later. But regarding this death wound, Nero was eventually deposed by the Roman Senate and sentenced to death. But before he could be executed, he escaped to a suburb of Rome where he committed suicide. And there were rumors that started springing up that Nero had actually been brought back to life somehow, miraculously, and that he was going to reascend. And so it seems that this wounded head of the beast represents Nero. John also writes that the beast was allowed to make war on the saints, to conquer them, and that it would be given authority over every tribe, every people and language and nation in the world, and that all the inhabitants of the earth would worship it. Everyone whose name was not written in the book of the Lamb. And this tells us something about how powerful the Roman Empire was in the ancient world, especially to those who lived in it. The Roman Empire seemed invincible, and it was enormous. People looked at it and they said, who is like the beast? Who possibly can fight against it? And to people in the Mediterranean world, the Roman Empire was the world. It controlled the world and it kept expanding. It seemed all powerful. And this was the beast that was making war against the saints, the followers of Jesus. This is what John and the churches are facing: an enormous beast that seems invincible, that is haughty, and that it is arrogant. And the underlying question is this one: who can possibly fight against this beast? Who could defeat this beast? And Revelation answers that question. So we've seen that Daniel is the prototypical apocalypse, and that it began circulating in a time of intense persecution, and that it offered hope and encouragement to Israelites who wanted to remain faithful to God in the midst of persecution. We also see that in apocalyptic writing, and including Revelation, beasts represent political entities and empires. And these entities and empires demand total allegiance and even worship. And we see that the beast in Revelation is given power by Satan, and that it seems to the people of the world to be all-powerful and invincible. They don't know who could possibly defeat this beast. And we see that it represents Rome, the empire that Christians in Asia Minor were living within. That's all I'm going to say about the beast at this time. We are going to take a few moments of reflection, and I'd like you to consider these questions. One of these questions: are there things in life and in the world that to you seem all-powerful and that seem to exercise this kind of authority, and that happen to be in conflict with the Lamb, with Jesus? And are there ways that these beasts tempt you or even try to coerce you to compromise your faith? So we'll take a few minutes to consider those questions.